a child, if they're abused in their home environment, for example, the fight flight things don't work for them. Flight are hyper aroused, hyper arousal, and our body automatically makes the decision: can we fight? Can we flee?
Mm.
If our body tells us we can't do either of those, then we go into the freeze.
Today, we're looking at a big question. Can the traumatized brain be cured? And we're starting right at the beginning. What developmental trauma actually is, how it shapes the brain, and what it means for you. This is a conversation for anyone who's ever wondered why they react the way they do, or who's trying to make sense of their own or someone else's childhood. Maybe you're a worker. My hope is that even if you're hurting, you can leave with a little bit more clarity today and the knowledge that healing is possible. I'm Andrea, host of the Fight for Your Life podcast and soon to be course, a superpowered evolution project. 2026 will be filled with projects to support our evolution, hopefully making a revolution. Thank you for being here. Hi, I'm Andrea, host of the Fight for Your Life podcast and soon to be course, a superpowered evolution project. 2026 will be filled with projects to support evolution, hopefully making a revolution. Thank you for being here. This series is really about the very first steps towards healing from trauma. It's phase 1 in a 3-phase program ultimately. So that's the stuff we're talking about in series 1 of this podcast. We don't want to hide from our lives, and a lot of us do. It's about providing simple, practical tools for step 1 of your therapeutic journey and your healing recovery journey. Think of it as pre-therapy or conjunct therapy. I really hope that you find some clarity from this episode 7. Can the traumatized brain be cured? Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with folks who may need this. Share it on your socials, all that. And I'll see you at the end for a recap and some practical takeaways. Hi.
Hello.
Podcast. Thank you for joining me again, Garry. We've referred to this previously as Fight for Your Life, but right now I'm not really sure what it's going to be called. What I'm really thinking of it is a step 1. All of the videos we're making are to help people in their very step 1 step toward trauma recovery. Do I have it? The little steps that are going to get them in the right direction, so then they can get pointed to where they need to get therapy, for example.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't know what you don't know. So today we are looking at the overall question of, can the traumatized brain be cured? But starting with, what is it? So what is developmental trauma? What is complex trauma? Thinking about what those look like compared to a normal brain. We won't go heaps into treatments, but just touch on some of that stuff. So let's talk about developmental trauma first. So when we first started talking, I didn't even know what it was. I knew I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I think you told me about it. So do you want to touch on that a little bit?
So do you want me to start with complex PTSD or developmental?
Developmental trauma, and I'll touch on. I'm separating them because someone who has got developmental trauma will get diagnosed as complex PTSD, and so there are going to be
Yes.
a lot of overlaps.
Yes.
But
So,
I've separated them a little bit because you can get complex PTSD as an adult.
yes.
Yeah.
So we could say developmental trauma is a subset of complex trauma. But,
Mm,
again, we'll come back to the complex trauma that is not developmental trauma, as you
mm,
just said. So developmental trauma, so it's trauma affects the brain development. So neuroscience has made great strides in the last 10, 15 years in terms of, um, well, much of the well-being movement. I'm not talking about the physical wellness movement, but the well-being movement
mm,
um, is based on an understanding that this, for example, gratitude, is really good for developing neural pathways that might have been undeveloped previously. And those neural pathways go to the well feeling part of our brain, right? So it opens up new possibilities for us. So the earlier we go back in life, the stronger is the development of the brain. Um, so they used to think, in fact, a generation or two ago, in my day, people were given schooling until, maybe the age of 18. And they felt like, you could improve your skills and so on. But really that was the bulk of your brain development. So get it in early and then go through it. Um, so it is those early years that we, we have three different sections of our brain. I guess we'll come to those later. But developmental trauma um, is when a child is in an environment, they're not necessarily implicated in the home here, but we'll say more about that. But when a child is in an environment where safety and survival become their major concern.
Mm.
And so children need predictability, they need routine, they need, they don't need happiness and sugar, you know, all of the time, but predictability is the important thing for children.
And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about trauma, full stop. And obviously, we're talking about developmental trauma. Would you say, just going back a step, a lot of people would say that birth to 7 years is pretty freaking important, or is that a bit of a myth?
No, no, that is
That's
certainly
very
important.
important. Yeah.
Very important. That's Sigmund Freud was the man for that, and of course he's kind of out of favor, not for very good reasons, to be honest. He was. We look at 100 years of psychotherapy now, and we know that Freud didn't do it all, right? He
Mm.
kind of stopped at a certain point, but what he did do, out of almost nothing, was incredibly important.
Well,
Uh,
what I was getting at is, um, like, you could say to someone, "Oh, have you been through childhood trauma?" And they'll be like, "No," because immediately the brain thinks physical violence, sexual violence,
yeah,
that sort of stuff. Whereas you just said predictability and routine.
yeah,
And, um, that reminds me of, um, not knowing what kind of mother I was gonna have on any given day or minute. So she could be angry, and her and I have talked about her violence, so I don't mind naming it. But she could be the sunshine of the world, or she could be, so that's quite extreme. But the other thing that I've noticed in families I've worked with, or as a youth worker, support worker in my own friendship family circles, is that if a young person or child doesn't know reliably, they can go to their parents for support and be supported. Just that simple. Like, I don't feel safe with this boy who is your friend's kid. And that's dismissed, but or it's like mum is intermittently snappy. Sometimes she yells. Mum goes, "Well, that's just normal. People yell." But the kid on the inside is walking on eggshells because they're going, "Is mum going to yell at me today, or is she going to be okay?" And we're not talking about physical violence. We're not talking about sexual violence. We're talking about, is mum going to
yeah,
yell at me today? Or am I going to be supported today? Can I rely on that? And that, I think, over time causes a lot of damage.
yeah. So you have that look on your face right now that invites me to say you can actually see it in children.
Oh.
If our own children, we probably denial is a great. It's more than just a river in Egypt. It's a great thing, right? We can overlook it in our own children, but children's natural way of being is spontaneous. And when they lose their spontaneity, then we need to start to worry about them and turn things around a little bit. So if a child of a friend of yours comes into your house, for example, or if your own children come in, um, and when they come in the door, they stand there for a moment and then maybe look around and get a feeling for how things are. That's the lack of spontaneity that we're talking about. And as you described, it is their safety that they're worried about. They're thinking about, what do I have to watch out for
Mm.
today or right now? And so just to get back to the neural development.
Feel free to do the brain hand thing.
Yeah, the brain hand thing. But first off, first I'll say what happens then is that kind of hypervigilance that grows from that kind of awareness, looking around. That's their development is going into their nervous system,
Mm.
and so they are. So this is the brain, right? So here we are with the hand brain. This being the brain stem, this being the middle brain. I'll talk about it in a moment, and this being the frontal cortex. And so this part of our brain is the mammalian, the ancient part that we shared with all of the animals at one point in our evolution, and animals still have a very strong awareness of safety, and that's what our primal brain does. And we have advanced, we've evolved over millennia, who knows how long really. And over time, the next step is the development of this relational emotional brain, which is smaller and in the center of our this thing, this dome. And our brain is still evolving, but we have now both this frontal cortex and even a prefrontal cortex now. And so when a person has to be very aware of their safety and survival, lots of energy goes into this part of the brain and the rest
Mm.
of it suffers. Yeah.
So that means that they're like their prefrontal cortex, that's executive functioning,
Yes.
thinking, ability to regulate more easily, things like that. But if we spend too much time here because we're in fight or flight semi all the time walking on eggshells,
That,
we spend so much of our life developing that becomes more of a natural state.
that's right. Well said. And so in addition to the fight and flight, we also need to talk about freeze. Because we're talking about developmental trauma, and our body responds to. So we were talking about um, that. You use the example of there doesn't have to be abuse and so on. That is true. There doesn't have to be abuse, but there may be abuse.
Mm.
And when a child is abused, a child, if they're abused in their home environment, for example, the fight flight things don't work for them. Fight flight are hyper aroused, hyper arousal, and our body automatically makes the decision: can we fight? Can we flee?
Mm.
If our body tells us we can't do either of those, then we go into the freeze, which is shutting down.
Yeah.
And they often use the term dissociation, which is actually just I call it uh, uh, what do you call it? Uh,
Mm. To me, it's like being in a bubble.
excarnating, right? We leave our body, so we don't have
Yeah.
to feel the impact of what might be
Yeah.
happening.
It's like the only way because you don't get to go because you're stuck.
Yeah.
You're a kid.
And so we might be dreaming, we might be spaced out. And so the symptoms, you asked earlier in the introduction about the symptoms, how do we know in children? So the flight responses, those children are very active. That's the difference between those two. The hyper aroused and the hypo-aroused is very inactive. So the
Mm.
hyper-aroused is the fight. They're the really aggressive ones, obviously. Who,
Would you say that, and I'll share from my own experience too in a second, but when someone's at home getting abused and they have no choice, really, especially when they're small, to do anything but freeze, do you think that kid's going to be a rat bag at school?
yes, that child will be a rat bag
Yeah.
at school. It might not be safe enough to be a rat bag at home, and yet their system is mobilized.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so the flight is the get me the hell out of here, you know,
Mm.
and so both of those symptoms. So trauma informed schooling is a big thing now. I mean, the schools recognizes that when
Yeah.
children are fidgeting or throwing things or having a
Uh,
tantrum, it's not because they're troublemakers. It's
yeah.
because they may have come from a particularly hard environment.
And we're gonna add one that gets missed a bit because this is how I handled it. Fawn gets missed
Yeah.
off. And at home, that looks like me making sure I always clean the bathroom and toilet, trying to be a good
Right.
girl. I always try to help with certain things. But at school, I was an A grade student, so I was getting hurt physically and all kinds of things at home, but I didn't lash out at school. I was a good girl, to the point that I did get picked on by other kids. I was too good a girl, but my main concern was having my teacher on side, and volunteering at the library and making sure that I looked normal. But it was also, I think, of kind of fawning because I needed to be safe somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, yeah, for people to watch out for. So we've talked about what we as adults can pay attention to when we're looking at children. And we had this, I've got a kind of got a timer going, idea that we want to keep it snappy because we partly want this to be heard by young people. Um, and and I personally want to encourage young people that if you identify that this is you, that you can grow up and get out, get a job, get out, get purpose and heal. I just really want to make that clear. But I really, I don't know if there's anything else, like I'll make some more content about what it looks like at home. But is there anything else that we could say to young people? Like we've talked about what's happening to the brain. Um, the thing of, yeah.
Well, another thing that we haven't mentioned is that emotional neglect is a form of abuse as well.
Mm,
So when you talked about yourself in that way, the difference between you at home and you at school, well, at school, at home, there was no emotional connection in our family. For reasons that I understand. My father was in World War II. His father was in World War One. My mother was from a very difficult family background as well. And so there was none. There were three of us, and none of us fit emotional needs met at all. And in school, I was the class clown. So I got noticed at school. I was a good boy. Everybody
mm,
liked me. They wanted kids to hang around with me.
mm.
Yeah, so I got my need for attention met outside of school, but in a good way, like you.
Yeah, yeah, same. And I credit my teachers. I had a couple of teachers who really went out of their way to support me and see me. And I really credit them for giving me a vision of what a good person could be like. Because peppered through teaching and schools is a bunch of people who aren't so kind as well, you know? Um,
Well, and probably both of us remember the kind of things that were said to us because they were so few and encouraged.
yeah, don't make me
And
cry.
here, decades later, they still see.
Yeah, yeah. I remember you gave an exercise in one of your groups once to write down, and it actually, okay, I had a lot of internal resistance to it to begin with. A lot of like the staccatos is the way my brain remembers it, of all the good things, all the nice messages people had said as we were growing up. And I was like, internally to begin with, I was like, oh, I can't, like maybe a fear that there was none. But then when I started writing, like they came flooding. No,
Yeah.
not to toot my own horn, but yeah, yeah. So,
So Andrew, just in terms of, I'm not sure what age, when you talk about young people who might be watching this, what age are you thinking?
teenagers, yeah, like
Teenagers.
probably like 13 to 18 to 20. I
So,
would like them to have the chance to identify, "Oh, that's me. Okay, I need to get some help." Like,
okay. So let's just cover that before we sign off. Okay.
mhm,
So what are the main things when you were, say, 15 or 17? What were your inner internal experiences, your main ones?
a drive to get out. Yeah, and,
That's the flight,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
and a message that I would say to young people is don't go get with some guy older than you thinking he's gonna save you 'cause, you just make the same mistake. Well, not make the same mistake, the same thing will happen. Um, and a drive to succeed. Like, I really, really wanted to do well at school so I could get a good job. and
and get away from it. That was
yeah,
another way, another flight thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's okay, like, you taught me my career development qualification. Um, when I did a lot of work with young people, I was all about getting them a job. It's get a job first, get a job, get money behind you,
Yeah.
get the F out.
So you're not so dependent on other people because
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
where we get shortchanged.
Mm, mm,
So in a part of this package, it talks about sometimes developmental trauma is also called relational trauma because
yeah,
our attachments come to the fore. And we don't know that when you're young because it's not so important. Well, it is very important, but we don't know until later on when people start forming relationships with one another that actually we don't do that very well.
yeah.
It takes a long time to actually get to saying that to ourselves as well. But
Well,
people,
I'm glad you brought it up because it was one of my last questions is what's the impact projecting forward of not dealing with it quick enough? And when I haven't told you about this yet, but I'm going to have this thing, Ask Auntie Andrea, conversations with Auntie Andrea. And there's going to be a hashtag, don't be like Auntie Andrea, because it took me a long time to figure this shit out. So, like, and not as a put down, like, I would
yeah,
like to give young people a shortcut. So, like, so projecting forward, if you don't recognize that you need help early enough and get the right help, and I'll talk about that another time because there's all different kinds of help you can get. The same thing actually keeps happening in different ways in different people in different bodies. And some people are like, oh, like I've had psychologists who be like, oh, it's just a coincidence. I'm like, no, no, I'm the common denominator. And after 3 unhealthy relationships where I'm getting beaten, raped, whatever, horrible things are happening, I'm like, how come? And eventually I've gone, I need to really, really heal. And so the cost of not doing that is pattern repeating. And like you said, the attachment theory stuff. So there's some interesting things. I was talking with a young person ages ago about there was a girl at their school who was really needy and she would get her hooks into everybody and just be like, at them, at them, at them. And it's like an anxious attachment. And what happened was she pushed people away and then she would get upset and lash
yeah,
out because all she wants is someone close to her. And I said to this girl, I said, oh, is her home life like X, Y, Z? And she was like, yeah, how do you know that? And I was like, because of her behavior. Like she's not getting that at home and she's trying to get it at school and she really, really wants to be held.
yeah,
And by the way, little chicken, it's not your job to hold her.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
help her get help, but stay safe because sometimes people like that can be a bit dangerous.
Little,
Um,
little chicken all in the least. But so since you talked about the anxious attachment type, the other major type is the avoidant type. And lots of people will relate to that as you go. And those
the what type? Didn't hear.
avoidant, they're the
Oh yeah,
ones who don't want people too close.
yeah.
So for those of you listening who might have breathed a sigh of relief when Andrea talked about the clingy, anxious type, you might identify as the distant type that don't
Mm.
want people too close, and that has its ramifications. You're probably more independent and stronger in some ways, but your relationships will also go uh, under the microscope at some point in your life.
Yeah, my ex I've had 2 husbands. My ex-husband, my second one, my dog does this thing where when you pat him, he puts his arm out and he actually does it so that he can balance, he can pat where he wants. But we had this big joke that that was like me. It was like, "Stay there, but pat me. But stay over there, but pat me." You know? Like, quiet. I wanna be with you, but not that close, you know? Just wanna know you're around.
Yeah.
Um
Look after yourself.
Yeah, yeah, but, like, you don't get to be close to people like that, and it might sound I think for some people it's quite appealing to keep that distance because you won't get hurt, but you also don't get to be loved and love in return, to quote Moulin Rouge. Um,
And so we cannot underestimate the importance of relationships. We are not in this thing called life alone. And for those of you who kind of feel about that, um, you'll one day, so neuroscience tells us that as well. Just how fundamental relationships are to our well-being.
Yeah, and healing. And I was looking
Absolutely.
up some pictures before, which I'll share when we do put all this out into the world, of, there was actually a scan of a Romanian orphanage abandoned baby brain compared to, like, a normal baby brain, and how different they were because they haven't been supported. And I was
Yeah.
listening to a podcast earlier that was saying the same thing, that people actually, like, you might get therapy and go, "Okay, I've got my therapist. That's all I need." Well, no, you actually need friends around you as well to help you feel safe and build trust. Um, what's
They do know statistics will say that um, two, so this is later in life, but two people can have the same potentially traumatic experience. I'm talking about on-art trauma now. And 75% of people will be traumatized by that. And what they have in common is the kind of emotional support, probably a stable childhood,
yeah.
but that they've always had people they could go to and did go to for conversation and comfort and so on.
And yeah, and there's also a predisposition. I've learned about it before, but I was listening to something earlier about it. And if a parent has been through significant trauma, and even if they don't perpetrate that trauma on their child can have a DNA altering, which will cause them to be more fearful, and that can be treated as well. Probably the last thing I'd say, and young people and adults alike will listen to this, is we talked about relational costs, kind of like in friendship and intimate relationship, but there's a relational cost on parenting and children. So, like, the young person that gets hurt and then goes on to have children but hasn't actually healed, um, will then go and have perpetrate some other kind of cost. It might not be the same thing, but without some awareness and without some healing, that's it's just gonna keep continuing down the chain unless someone gets in there. Like I noticed with my son, because I was so scared of everything. Oh my god. Um, when I finally let him go to the boys' toilets, I don't know how old he was. He may have been double digits, poor guy. I'd be like, "If you're not out in 2 minutes, I'm coming in," or, the school, his primary school at one point was, like, maybe 300 meters down the road, and it took me ages to let him walk to school by himself. And then when he did, I just had to stand there and watch for a while until I could, and he was like, "Mum, I'm okay."
Yeah.
And those experiences opened up my need for healing, because I realized that if I kept him squished and kept putting my fear on him, then he would be like that. And so I had to actually be really conscientious and let that go and feel that fear inside of me and let him grow up and be big and strong. And it was terrifying. Um,
Even simple things like, you often see parents with young children, and children have to, slowly explore the world. And if every time they turn around, someone's saying, "Careful, oh, be careful," then they kind of, they wake up to what's going on, and that's a similar sort of thing. It might not be trauma, but they can't just be.
it's
Um,
it's a conditioning. I remember learning that again when Johnny was little. It's like they'll pay attention to what you say. So,
yeah,
like, if they fall over and you're like, "Oh my god," that's a cue for them to cry.
yeah,
If you're like, "Hey, are you all right? Did you handle that okay? Can you get up?" I'll be like,
yeah,
"Oh, yeah, I can get up." And, like, don't fall. So they're climbing a tree. You don't say don't fall because 'cause they'll look to fall. You say,
yeah,
"Hold tight, hold tight."
yeah, no,
But, like, learning those kinds of things as a young parent, and I was like, "Oh, it's so tricky."
yeah,
Like, healing and parenting can be done at the same time. It's just
yes, yes.
all right. So this would essentially be the end of a chat about developmental trauma. And the reason, so I'm going to sort of split this if you're happy to keep going on to complex trauma. Um, the reason there may be a long one and a few short ones. We'll see what happens on the internet later. Is developmental trauma is really specifically from growing up for a long time as you're developing with trauma. You can still be diagnosed with complex PTSD if you've been through childhood trauma, but a soldier in war, I've shared this story before on another one, I'm sure. I'll say it quickly. Bunch of soldiers in a tank, tank gets blown up. Some people have zero effect because they had a good childhood and no predisposition to trauma. Some people may get PTSD, which is single incident trauma because there was a single incident. A couple of them get dragged off and taken hostage, and they know they get randomly tortured. They don't know when they're going to get out. They have no autonomy as to if they can get out. The other guys in the tank, they managed to army crawl their way out of there with half a leg missing or something, right? That guy's got PTSD. This one over here is going to get complex PTSD. And to me, from my knowledge, blah, blah, a core part of that is about being trapped. Um, so other examples are like domestic violence, genocide, wars. Um, some people got complex PTSD from the big lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I,
that's
I've had clients, I've had clients who, so in my private practice, I woke up to developmental trauma because I needed to, because something was going on that I didn't understand, so it's this stuckness, right?
mm,
They just cannot push through despite their suffering and their desire to make change and so on. They cannot push through. So that's the difference with trauma versus our normal adaptive stuff, which we can change.
mm,
So, so people would come to me. I woke up to it, to understanding trauma, and then I started teaching trauma. So I learned about the prevalence of childhood trauma, which is between, I think it's a conservative estimate actually, but between a quarter and a third of the population.
mm,
Um, and when I knew the symptoms of developmental trauma in adults, I was a little bit cocky, I suppose, thinking, "Oh, I've got your number, right?" And so, it's not long before I share enough of my understanding that people get it. And yet, there were a few people for whom their early environment, lots of people say, I was fine, I was good, I had a great
mm,
childhood, but then a little bit of probing revealed something else. However, there have been times when it was, in fact, good. And so bullying at school was
mm,
one of those things for a few people,
mm.
because bullying at school happens over years.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
tagged. And then you go through the next years of schooling with those same people. And so that's been a big one as well. One of my clients had a pervert who lived next door. And when the parents went out, the pervert was asked to keep an eye on the kids.
Mm.
And he was always next door. Even if he wasn't looking after the kids, then even mum, he was always next door.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. Um, so well, I'm just having a look at my questions. So it's still similar complex PTSD. So let's imagine there's an adult and they haven't been through, as far as they're aware, a bunch of childhood trauma, and they develop complex PTSD as an adult due to a long period of time, like a long marriage or dysfunctional relationship. But possibly too.
A long period of time of feeling unsafe or insecure. So the same things we talked about is with developmental trauma will affect people in their adult, can affect people in their adult years. Those ones who are really okay and a good support networks will probably manage those situations. People with a lot of self-respect probably won't find themselves in those
Yeah.
situations. Yeah. But yes, you can develop complex PTSD as an adult, certainly. Yeah. Now, complex PTSD is a little more complex because it's not in the DSM yet, the
Mm.
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health illness and mental illness. Um, although the DSM is the American version. There's an international version which comes out of the UK with complex trauma in last year. And
Yeah.
so the next edition of the DSM will have undoubtedly have complex trauma in it.
And did you say, what did you say at the start? That developmental trauma is a subset of complex PTSD.
Well, you can take, so I didn't read that anywhere, but
Yeah,
that's
that's
the
easy.
best understanding I can have to that because it's the
Yeah.
same thing, right? Over a period of time, you find yourself in an unpredictable, unsafe environment where your nervous system, and this is called neuroception, right? You don't have the ability to wait and stop and think about change and coming and so on. You have to be aware. And so your nervous system has to do that sensing for you. And that again takes us back to the primal brain, because that's where the nervous system
Mm.
is embedded in our body.
And then that's how come people can be quite reactive in terms of, like, you talked about
Absolutely.
that before, when someone has got complex PTSD, and they've been through, and I'm gonna touch on this a little bit more, they're different things. So you can't just say, "Oh, PTSD looks like," or complex PTSD, you hear a gunshot and you fall to the ground, because everyone's gunshot is different, everyone's trigger is different.
Yeah.
So, like, um so what did you say? You were just saying about, oh, I already forgot, but my point that I was making in response to whatever you said was that if you get constantly bullied at work, I did for several years, I became afraid of email. Like, I hate opening my email. I actually have paid people to sit with me and open my emails and um, read them for me and just let me know if I need to know anything, because I don't need to know what I don't need to know, because that's how scared I am after getting bullied. So that became a bit of a trigger for me. But, like, I had something happen a while ago, and my freeze response as a fully grown adult to an adult had sent me a message on Messenger, on Facebook Messenger. And it was when I had the pole studio, and her daughter had contacted her hot, because she couldn't do her class because she was like 20 minutes late. And then her grown up woman's mum had a go at me on Messenger. And I'd actually been having a really good day. I wasn't feeling vulnerable. I was proud of myself. I'd been singing and doing my washing and, went to the shop. And I'd like Messenger to be a friendly place. Like, email is not a friendly place. I don't want to get the same feelings about Messenger. Um, I opened Facebook while I'm at the shop. I got this message. I'm like, oh, who's this? And it was like a bullet hit me. Like, I literally just wanted to back up again. When I go into a full freeze, I go into a ball. And so, like, I just wanted to back up against not a wall, a shelf with food in it, and just, like, go down into a ball. And I was like, that was a really strong urge. And I couldn't remember what else I went to the shop for. And I was like, you need to get out of here, or someone's going to lock you up in a mental home because you're just going to fall into a ball like a little pokeball. And so I managed to get out, pay for my shopping, and cried my eyes out in the car. But I guess I wanted to explain that because that's what complex PTSD looks like. So, like, you have something happen over and over again, and then when something that looks like that happens again, your brain just takes over. Like,
So we call those triggers. Most people understand the word trigger, right?
mm,
So that lack of safety, being exposed, that people can reach you like that and undermine you like that, triggers your early environment, which for you is very unsafe. It's an
and
irrational trigger. You can see that it's an irrational
yeah,
trigger.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, so many, it's like you said something before, like, not everyone will react the same way. Like, 75% of people would brush that off. And people would say, "Oh, don't let it get to you." And I'm like, "I'm not letting it get to me. My body
It's got to
literally
be.
takes over.
Yeah.
It just takes over. I can't." And that's how come I was frustrated when I got cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, I just trusted my therapist for years, but all I did was beat myself up because I'd be like, "Okay, I'm not gonna do this thing anymore," where I used to scream at people, used to get really upset and react really strongly. And I could say to myself, "Oh, I'm not gonna freeze or fall into a ball anymore." And cognitive behavioral therapy about that, what I'm gonna do instead is check the evidence and does that feel true or not? And can I recorrect my thinking? and not fall into a ball. No, none of that's an option. Like, it doesn't help at all. The Just to make a comment on that though, CBT is a useful skill to learn because when you are of mind and are just upset, like, there's a difference between being upset and triggered. You can use that skill when you're upset, but you can't use it when you're triggered. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
So, so the thing, if counselors at listening, you'll realize that psychologists, psychotic practitioners use CBT because that's what they learn in med training. Counselors learn CBT and that a lot of other things as well. And so CBT leaves a lot of people cold because it doesn't impact. And maybe what you just said is the obvious mystery resolved there, that a lot more people than we've been aware of in the past had trauma. And what CBT asks you to do, fundamentally, it'll support you and set you up. So it's not a relational therapeutic approach. You have to go about it on your own, right?
yeah, and also it's asking you to like, back to the brain thing, I don't remember all the
It's asking you to use your cognitive.
yeah, but when you're triggered, that's
Yeah.
I saw a diagram because I was looking it up the other day. Flip your lid. That's saying, like, flip your lid, so you can't access that bit anymore. So you can't actually use good news is there are ways to heal triggers, and I've had some of them and then accessed the therapy. I won't tell that story today, though. The thing that I find interesting is I'd done before we had this chat, I was looking around for images and things that would educate people, but there doesn't actually seem to be a lot of obvious things I can find on the difference between developmental trauma brain scans to complex PTSD as an adult, because you got to think like they would be different because when the child's brain is developing and all these things are happening as it's developing, those things can last forever. And then, but the person who has complex PTSD purely as an adult, those changes can't be exactly the same. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're still going to
Uh,
get the enlarged amygdala or
you can't undo them. Well, the amygdala, so those parts, they can shrink. Like the hypothalamus, the amygdala, they can shrink in the light
mm,
of storm. Um,
what was that
but
last word you said? They can shrink.
in the light of trauma, in the face of trauma, those things they do deteriorate. Actually, people, depending on the severity of the trauma, but at some point we'll probably talk about, or we could right now flag the adverse childhood experiences test,
Yeah.
A- ACEs, and there's only 10 questions there. And so if you have exposure to a few of these, um, it is known. So, and things like parental divorce is one of them. And although, of course, you can't wish for the adults to remain together
Mm,
if things are horrible between them, but it does have an impact on the children.
yeah.
And how we do that makes a difference. But my point about the shrinking of our brain matter is in in children. I think with 7 out of 10 scores on the ACE test, their life expectancy is 20 years less than average.
Wow.
So that's very significant.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that applies in my family. I talked about my parents in the last section, and they both died in their 50s, and my older brother died at 61. That's
Mm.
well and truly more than 20 years behind, earlier than average life expectancy.
Well, may you be a super ager like we discussed before. We'll go in a minute because I know we're limited time. We're trying to limit our time as well. Is we'll talk a bit more about the potential that we know of for brain change and look into research for that for later chats with someone somewhere. But I wanted to chat about. We talked about relationship. the impact on relationships later for developmental trauma. But if we look at complex PTSD as in an adult got it for the first time as an adult, and it's still similar stuff in that, like, but I wanted to give two really different examples. Someone who goes through domestic violence, I think we talked about it a bit before, like, obviously, well, it's not obvious at all. Some people are gonna avoid relationships as a cost of it, and some people are gonna throw themselves right back into another one because they want one so badly, and their anxious attachment needs are so strong that they just wanna be attached to somebody, and that both of those things can perpetuate that cycle. But then and we'll unpack, like, see what you have to say about that in a minute. The other kind, like, there's more kinds, but, like, if you think about a soldier who's gone to war and they get complex PTSD as a result of their war experience, their impact on their relationships is gonna be really different. So, like, I've read things about, men who have had to do things in war that were pretty terrible, but then they come back and feel like they don't deserve their families or they don't deserve their children. And so they become distant. They might become alcoholics or overtrainers or whatever to try to get it out of their body because they're used to using their body. Um, yeah, so I guess, I don't know. Have you got anything to say about that? Because I was just trying to think about the difference, the impact of complex PTSD on relationships.
I hadn't thought about um, servicing and willing um, in terms of their. Um, so I think we can say people with complex PTSD, whether it's developmental or complex PTSD, the place they want to avoid is the quiet inner yelling
Mm,
because it's too painful, too chaotic. And so they do things to avoid that. And those things are usually unhealthy things like drinking
mm,
too much or risky behavior or but staying loudly active. So many of my clients have been, lots of people with complex trauma are very high functioning because it's another one of those things,
yeah.
right? Um, uh, if I can't be wanted, I'll be needed. So they get out there changing the world or at least working hard. It also relieves them of that quiet inner space.
Mm,
And they go all day and they can never go enough. They can never be good enough. And then at the end of the day, they'll have, I work with a lot of men, they'll have 6 or 8 years in the
mm,
evening proceeding to sleep, right? So when
mm,
they can't lose themselves in work anymore, they'll lose themselves in consciousness.
yeah.
And so I'm sure that relationships, what's asked of them in relationships is just too painful. That ability to be really present
Mm,
is too painful in relationship. And of course, well, you do know, I think people of my generation, well, I was a baby boomer, our parents' relationships, that was 2 whole generations in a row that
mm.
were in world wars. We looked at our parents' generation and not many people's parents had warm, loving relations.
Yeah, yeah. And I always used to say to my son, even when he was younger, like, the way I see it is my job as a parent is to heal as much as I can and become my best self so he can become his best self. And the process of evolution, therefore, would be that he should end up better than me, you know?
Yeah.
And like, that's how I saw my duty as a parent and how I see healing, like the more of us that heal.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we do have kind of one last topic if you have time. But before we get to that, I just want to encourage people and maybe ask your advice because this stuff can be quite heavy and people can come away going, "Oh, I'm a bit fucked up." And that's not a nice feeling. I felt it plenty of times in my life and felt like broken to the point of not being able to be repaired, you know?
Yeah.
And we've got a little meditation over on Spotify, but like my advice would be to start to find little ways to slow yourself down.
Well,
so that you can be present. Like, there's someone I learn a little bit from called Richard Rudd. He's the author of Gene Keys, and he talks about finding micro pauses.
well,
Like where can we just have a breath and notice something good? Like
yeah.
start somewhere small by noticing something good. I don't know. What would you say to, like, to someone who might be listening to this and going, "Oh my god, I need help."
Well, so that opens another topic.
Mm,
So in the short term, breathing really helps, right?
yeah,
So I know people kind of think, in the face of all of this chaos inside of me, breathing, really? However, what the breathing does is bring your heart back into the rhythm.
yeah.
So all of that anxiety, which is the general experience of trauma, is anxiety at some level. Um, the heart, regulating the heart can regulate that anxiety to some extent. And our mutual mate, Andrew Huberman,
Oh,
we both like him. He's got lots of really good videos. I learned the latest breathing technique, which is based in neuroscience and him, which is this double inhale and a long exhale. So it's,
yeah. It's also called sip, sip, sigh. Is another little prompt.
is it? That's a good word for it. So I have recommended that to a lot of people,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
everybody says that works.
Yeah,
Um,
and he said 5 minutes calms you right down, and
yeah,
I'm like, "Oh, we'll stick that on my list." One of the things I've been wanting to do on my Instagram, and I've got a little fitness business that I have, is, and in my fitness business, we do a different breath learning each week. So when we're doing the stretching, I'll teach a different technique and explain why it works and encourage them to go about their week trying it. And so I'm
right.
definitely gonna, and it sounds, that's what I'm trying to, it sounds, like you said, it sounds silly, sounds weird, but
Sounds
like,
like not very much for
yeah,
something
but
that's
it's
so
so
big.
powerful.
Yeah.
And, um, I've heard breath workers just so passionate about the breath saves our life.
So the other thing I want to say before we close, in terms of hope,
Mm,
is there is parenting this thing called post-traumatic growth.
yes.
And I'm fortunate now that I'm lecturing in postgrad work in trauma, and so lots of mature age students. It's actually a postgrad degree in counseling psychology, but trauma is one of the units that I teach. And by the time people get there, they want to be counselors because they know how much you can help with counseling. For
Mm,
the most part, they've had great experiences with counseling. Um, and many of them, a high percentage of them have trauma. So if we can say a third of the population, um, a third of the adult population in Australia is affected by complex PTSD, generally in the form of mental trauma, the number of people who walk into my practice would be considerably high. The ratio would be considerably higher than that because they are people in midlife who are still wrestling with things, right?
yeah,
And the number of people who go into the healing professions, that's usually out of insight and a commitment to do good for other
yeah,
people. And so my point is it's a great place to work with trauma because so many of those people are in the post-traumatic growth stage of trauma.
mm,
And it's kind of not a time thing to say to people who are in the throes of uh, the chaos of trauma triggering. However, I think it's worth saying because people think this is a never-ending thing, but
yeah,
it can, and we can learn to self-regulate ourselves, self-regulate, and and when you reach the point of saying, "I didn't have it any other way,"
yeah,
you're there, like
yeah,
because I wouldn't have it any other way because the depth that I have achieved in my life is very satisfying for me, as opposed to somebody who's had it really easy. and they get a good job and maybe
Mm,
look how to climb the ladder and they, have a nice home and a nice marriage and nice holidays and so on. But they don't know the depths that life can take us to
yeah.
in
I
terms of richness.
And that richness is, like, with healing, is actually being able to support other people. Like, I had a
Yes.
friend, she's come a massive long way in, like, a month to 6 weeks, and probably 6 weeks ago, she contacted me. She was panicking, she was at the doctor, and, I had the opportunity to hold her because she was my friend. I could just hold her right up close with my body, and I helped her regulate with my own breath and
Mm,
felt her body calm down in my arms, you know?
mm,
I felt like crying, tooting my own horn, no. But, like, it actually I came away from that going, "You actually can help people," you know? And, like, just whispered in her ear, "What's 3 things you can see? What's 3 things?" And I help her find them. "Can you
yeah,
feel the bed? Can you feel your hip pressed against the" you know what I mean? And, like, to be able to go, "Oh, wow." That came out automatically because I've done it so much. And yeah, and that's what I want to give people. The other topic I did have on the agenda, but I don't think either of us know much about it, and it can be a whole other thing, and I can't find anything on it, was about brain change and scans and what do we know about brain change. But I think, like, what we know is what we just said is post traumatic growth is real. And I'm gonna research for some brain scans.
yeah.
Like,
I'm sure Andy Huberman will show some videos which you know convey in the environment of unconditional positive regard, in the environment of
yeah.
empathy and understanding, all of these connections that happen. Um,
Yeah,
so
I've
so in
saved
the
a
counseling, sorry,
no, no, you're right.
I'll just say this about the counseling profession because counseling, there's many different modalities in counseling. That's approaches to counseling for people who don't know. They all were pretty keen to lay claims that they were research based, when in fact the research was quite subjective. It was like giving you on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel today? You'll do some
Mhm.
interventions on a scale of 1 to 10. A month later, how do you feel now? And you feel better, right? But it's quite subjective. Now, neuroscience shows us that when a person spends an hour in a place of unconditional positive regard with a counselor, because that's our job as therapists, not necessarily the cognitive behavior stuff, although that is effective as well in a different way. But they can now see an hour of that and view all of these places in your brain in my time.
Mm.
Um,
Science and research is amazing, and it's so, um, incredible what's being found. I was listening to one yesterday where he was talking about, because 'cause I've been working through a podcast of his on, erasing trauma, and
yes,
they actually found that by putting your body under. And he said he actually suggested don't do this, by the way, people,
I'll
like,
do
it's
it
still
for
getting
them.
researched. But putting yourself into a state of hyperventilation, so I won't give instructions on how to do it, he did. He's like, "Try it if you want, but don't try it really." And actually journaling about your experience,
Okay.
for a specific time frame had massive results in rewiring the brain because you chose to step into a stressed state that replicated a previous stress state where then you engage that part of the brain. And anyway, there's this whole thing. But my point is, there are so many helpful, affordable ways and to heal and change the brain, and we can now prove it, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Everything you say could be followed up with something else, couldn't it? But we
Yes,
will wrap up.
we will wrap up. That's exactly right. That was my intention to go. We were going to talk about this, but there is so much to it, and Andrew does a great job. So
Yeah.
just tag him here. Here's an Andrew Huberman quote.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary. I'll press stop on recording. Thank you for learning about it, and make sure you get help and breathe.
What she says.
Thank you for staying with me through this conversation. If you recognize yourself in anything that we talked about today, please know this: what happened to you is not your fault, and change is possible. Evolution in your own world is possible. You can grow and live a life beyond survival, even if it feels far away right now. There are a few simple practices that you can start exploring as some takeaways that you can do from today's episode. You could do a noticing your patterns journal. Some call it a trigger journal. You can keep a little journal of when old reactions or feelings show up in daily life. And they could be memories. They could also be a physical response. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that's what happens when people are getting triggered and they feel powerless to do anything about it. And I know I felt powerless for a really long time. And we're starting to notice what was behind my behaviors and what was the root cause of them. And I could make a note in my phone and then go therapy them. So just bringing awareness to it can actually be quite enough to create some change. There are some other things you can do to create some space. You can ground yourself, spend a few minutes each day feeling your feet on the floor. You can do it now. Noticing your breath without changing it. There's a few other things you can do, but just stopping and pausing and being present really helps. Another thing you can add to that is to name what's around you. So feel your feet on the floor, notice your breath, notice the tree, notice the corner of the room. Is there anything different around you? Stuff like that. What happens is you're coming back into the present and you're not off in worry land or future or past, anxiety, worry. And that's what starts to help your nervous system to feel safe. And when it feels safe, it can rest. And when it can rest, it can recover. And then we can start to actually deal with things. We can't deal with things until we have made that space. I'll put a few other tips in the show notes, like moving gently. You can do wall pushes. You can do like shaking and bouncing and stuff like that. And they're all things that I'm going to be putting in my mini course. You'll see that linked sometime soon, just to give people a taste of experimenting what this stuff does. I've been working with it for about a year now, and it's changed my life a lot. And my clients who a few were doing it once a week for an hour, and one of those ladies has integrated it into her every day. So it's a really, really good and settling practice that a lot of people also do with their children, and it helps them as well. Obviously, the other really important thing is to reach out if you need help to a friend or to a helpline. And often comment sections of things are a little bit helpful, but that's not for therapy or big stuff. Lastly, my hope is to give you tools in each episode where you can start to begin to do simple little doable steps that build a foundation for deeper healing. In my experience, I wasn't able to access a lot of the therapy that I had or go deep until I'd learned to do this nervous system settling stuff. And it's just helped me so much. So if you like what we've shared today, please like, share and subscribe, and head to the show notes for links to the resources. And thank you for doing your bit for the superpowered evolution, because if we all do our bit, that's what it will be, superpowered. And we'll all evolve. And things will change a lot if we all do our little bit. So until next time, take gentle care of yourself. Over and out.